what we realized early on, if we're going to be entrepreneurs, it doesn't come with a pension. And it doesn't come with a 401k unless I'm the guy contributing, like the company I'm working for is not putting into it. So in order to create autonomy in our lives, we had to have additional streams of income. Otherwise, if I'm the guy at the business and that business is the only provider for my family and I get hit by a bus tomorrow, what does that do to my family? That's the mindset that we had early on.
Welcome to another episode of the Profitable Property Management Podcast. Today, I have Shawn Johnson on the podcast with me. Shawn, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm honored.
I'm excited to have you on. We've known each other for a while, and you're in a different phase of life than when we first met. When you and I first met, you were an active operator in the game, growing your business, hell-bent on building the best property management company possible. And some things have shifted for you since then. I want to talk about the story arc of your journey in property management. But what I want to know is this. When you exited your property management business, can you just describe it for me at that point in terms of size, heads, market? Give me some flavor of where you were at in your management company prior to exiting.
So we were in 7 markets, approximately, if I look back, about 1,200 doors, 1,000 to 1,200 doors, I think, and approximately 23 employees at the time. And this was scattered across various markets in the U.S., so they were not close markets. We were in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, North and South Carolina, and Florida.
And how long had you been in the game leading up to that exit?
That was about our 10th year was at that stage. So 10 years prior.
And how long since the exit?
It's been 3 years.
3 years. All right. So some time to get some distance to reflect on it.
Trying to get my gray hair to not be gray anymore.
Yeah, so you earned your spurs with your time in the industry. And one of the things that I'm interested in talking with you about is not just your journey as an operator, but really the transition for you. There's been a lot of folks that have exited the industry over the last handful of years. We saw a ton of industry consolidation, a lot of M&A, and the outcomes for folks afterwards are quite disparate. Some folks have almost immediately started another property management company. Some folks have retired. Other folks have started new ventures doing different things. What does that 3 years look like for you? Like, walk me through kind of the mindset of what you experienced mentally post-exit.
Oh, that is probably the most odd experience I've had. You really don't mentally prepare for something that as well as you think you can. So just, in full transparency here, I didn't actually want to sell as the CEO, but it was the right time to sell the business. So not being in a position to want to sell causes you to have not looked forward. What am I going to do when this does actually sell? And so I don't know that I was emotionally or mentally prepared. I always told myself, like, there's going to be a mourning period to not being the guy, right? To go into the office and running and operating the business. And so those 3 years were really great reflection time. Like, I've been able to do this or X or Y and Z, but now what do I need to do to continue to create value? And so it took me a while to really refine that thought process and really refocus, if you will. So it was a lot of brainstorming, a lot of testing, a lot of I'm going to do this and it kind of fail, and just reiterating, a lot of reiterations.
I want to talk about the energy amidst that reiteration. What I've noticed is that you didn't immediately jump into something else. You've taken some time. And when I think about the pressure and the burden of starting the business the first time? When, of course, you have a lot of lofty ambitions, but in general, for most folks, survival is the motivation. And you ain't getting too fancy about all these grand ambitions because you are trying to pay your bills and feed your family. I remember those first few years as me willing something into existence. I wasn't hoping it was going to work out. I was completely committed because the alternatives looked quite grim. That's really different energy than approaching a business, an opportunity, and a possibility post-exit. What would you say has been what's been your experience on the impact of the background energy that you've brought to thinking about new opportunities and pursuits on this nexus between desperation versus freedom and optionality?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that I was able to take money out of the equation. So when you're, in survival mode, it's how do I make the dollars so I can pay my bills? And luckily, Chris and I, my wife and I, had set up our lives that we didn't have to rely on the money anymore. And so the focus becomes, how can I create the most value for others versus like, I got to make the dollars make sense. You know what I mean? So like, what's the biggest impact that I can have for the industry I do care about and have essentially exited. I still have a quasi management company that manages my my portfolio, but it really became like an impactful thought process. Like, how do I actually make an impact instead of just sitting back and retiring, if you will? Because to me, retirement was kind of a thought process. Like, maybe I'll retire someday. But the reality is like, I don't even think there's a lot of sexiness to retirement, because I would much rather do something I really enjoy that that can pay, if you will, but makes an impact to the people I serve. And if I could do that in a manner that fits my passions and wants in life, then that's the route I'd like to go.
So you're able to step back and think about what's next. And obviously, you've landed on some stuff. I'm excited to get into that. Let's go back to the story of establishing the management company. How did you get into property management in the first place?
Great question. I was flying helicopters professionally, and I had a great 7-7 schedule back then. And my sister-in-law at the time, we had just moved back to my hometown in New Mexico. And my sister-in-law at the time said, there's not a great management company. You guys should really look into starting a management company. And we had previously owned a business. We had a full-service car wash in southern New Mexico, and we had sold that. And we were looking for the next business to really start. And my wife didn't have work to move up there. I was, I was flying professionally. And so she decided to start it. And when I was not working flying helicopters, I was working in the business. And we grew that. Like you said, we were in the survival mode for 2 years. We didn't touch a profit for 2 years. It was just like, we are going to will this thing into existence. And at first we had like really low goals. It was, if we can just get to 100 doors, we'll be happy, right? And then it's like, oh, there's 100 doors. So what's the next milestone that we can achieve, And it was really on our mission to just be the best management company and the biggest market share that we could in our market.
And what was the market?
Farmington, New Mexico.
What big city that people would have heard of is that approximate to?
Big city not, but Durango, Colorado is probably the most known tourist area that's near us. It's an hour away. Albuquerque is 2.5 hours southeast of us.
What's the population of Farmington?
50,000.
So this is a small city. This is officially a small city that you're managing, and makes sense it wouldn't be a super competitive landscape. You're growing the business, earning your spurs. At what point did the business get stable, and did it become obvious to you like that this was going to work and this was going to be a real going concern?
Yeah, I really think it was right at the beginning of 2 years. We thought, wow, there's profit here that we haven't touched. We've been reinvesting everything that we've made. And I had a good cushion of security of a job, a W-2 job. And it was at that point that I quit that W-2 job to just go all in on the business. And so that was kind of okay, we can make this happen. And I think if I dedicate my time fully, and Kristen's fully in it, then we could scale it faster.
And how would you describe this shift in your priorities and awareness in becoming a entrepreneur, going from just being an operator, running the hand crank, keeping things going, to actually having an identity that was commensurate with building something of value?
I think for me, it was understanding the need to hire good people to take on the tasks that I didn't enjoy doing. So I don't like to go inspect properties. I don't like to go post 3-day notices, those types of things. And how can I hire now somebody to take on that role and accelerate this so I can focus on the business itself, running the business? Now that was not an easy transition. I think with any new leader, what happens, you start hiring people and they start knocking on the door and asking every single question. And I didn't even know how to navigate them to think critically on how to answer the questions themselves. But that was kind of the shift. Like, there's something more to this and we can scale this. We could provide a job for other people and create value for more than just ourselves. And how do we do that in a manner that makes the biggest impact in our marketplace is really the mission at that point.
The staffing mix that you're kind of getting at, like, when you hired folks on early, were you hiring folks in more junior roles and kind of progressively laddering up in experience?
Yeah, exactly. We started with a, front receptionist, and then it started with an assistant property manager. We were always going to be the property managers, and then it was like, okay, we need to hire a property manager to scale a different portfolio and expand the portfolio further. But so yeah, it was always like a ladder of progression.
What I find interesting about that is that that's what most businesses do. And what's interesting about that is that it really impacts your frame of expectations of what is possible. In theory, the opposite order is possible. You could hire somebody really senior at the outset and slowly over time replace lower and lower positions under them. Most people don't do that. The implication of doing that is that when you're hiring folks more early and more junior, you tend to not be fully aware of the level of experience that you're actually hiring. Meaning, if human labor and potential could be put on a 10-point scale, it can't, it's not really fair, but just bear with me for the exercise. If you're hiring a 7 and you're hiring a 7, that's one thing. You can really wrap your head around that. The pay, the skills are there, it's matching. If you're hiring at a level 4 and you're thinking you're hiring at a level 7, that's a different story. And that's where most operators tend to be, is their expectations of knowing what to look for is constantly being re-leveled and reset based on the most experienced, most capable person that they've come in contact with. And your exposure to this tends to map to the level of success that you've experienced. So early on, your universe of what's possible is small, and therefore you think smaller. And that's the vicious cycle of this negative self-affirmation of hiring folks that are less capable, less experienced, not generating an amazing outcome, conditioning you to think that therefore, well, you just got to do the job yourself, etc. What would you say to somebody wanting to break out of that cycle, or at least accelerate the timeline of the awareness of how much you can delegate, even if your business is small?
Yeah, if I had to look back, what I would actually do is I would track my time by the 15-minute interval and put them into two different buckets. I'd put it into a bucket of, does this create value for the company, or is this just a $1 task, $2 task, if you will? $3, $4 tasks I would separate out into a different bucket, and then I would separate those into, does this create an energy around it that I enjoy, or is this a suck for me? Like, I don't like doing this. And I would hire based off of that instead of, here's the role and I want somebody to fit this square peg, I think. And that would allow for further, I would say, like, further growth in a person. The other fallacy I think that young business owners have, or just new ones, is that we want to hire the 7, but we only want to pay for a 4, because we feel like the finances only can afford the 4.
It's a risk hedge.
It's a risk hedge instead of an investment. And that, I do look back and I was like, that wasn't the wisest decision. I would have much rather hired a high caliber person. We did get around to that. I did recruit a person that I was paying like six figures plus some, and really took the business to the next level until complacency set in. And we were talking about the Peter principle earlier today, and it was totally that. It was time to make a decision, and because we weren't now meeting KPIs, and now I'm paying the 7 level, but only getting a 4 performance, if you will. So the opposite happened.
What got you here won't get you there.
Exactly.
Tell me more about that. As the company scaled from 0 to 1,200 and some odd doors, that obviously is a really big shift in organizational structure, in levels of management, the need for middle management, et cetera. What shifted and what broke along the way, and what allowed you to keep scaling?
The biggest thing that breaks, I think, is process, or at least did for us, and then people. I think the focus has to be that just because you have a technician good at a role, they don't automatically make a good manager. And that's so often that you see business owners. I made those mistakes. But then hiring quality management to actually run the business would have been, now we're in a small tertiary market, right? So the specific labor market isn't really geared towards finding exceptional property managers, but you might find good people managers that could produce an outcome that you're really needing to grow a business. And so we struggled with that sense. The scaling part, when when we did a merger and we're at 1,200 doors, to figure out what works in one market versus what will work in another market was mind-blowing to us. We thought we would generate economies of scale and they would be relatively easy to find. And it was the exact opposite of the truth. It was a slog. And I think we went through 2 full iterations of processes to figure out what was right. But the third iteration really felt like we were on that uphill climb again, that we were making great progress. The other problem was clearly defined policies. When you do a merger, how customers are treated or how situations are handled at a frontline staff level is different per company. And to really marry that into a clear policy and then the process formulates after that was a mistake that we made. We tried to do process first and then policy, and it really, like, let's define what we want the outcome to be based off of these policies, and then work it backwards. Keep the end in mind in order to create the process that should be driven.
Love that. Policy always precedes process. Let's give some more exposition and tell some more of the story to help people connect the dots. So you start the company, you grow it to hundreds of units, and then you decide to merge, and that merger drove further growth. Tell me a little bit about that merger story.
4 of us were in a mastermind together. One that was not in the mastermind was my wife, who is my business partner. And then Matt Tringali's business partner, Danny Pluteman, was also not in the mastermind. And we decided to form a national brand. At first, it was talks about how can we compile our resources to be a better, stronger company, so that we can use those resources. But then it formulated it. If we're going to do that, we might as well just merge, right? We just might as well just go all in. And that was the actual outcome. But running multiple companies, multiple different ways of operating those companies in different marketplaces is not an easy task. And it came at a high stress of marinating different people. And one of the things that we did, probably, that, hindsight's 2020, you said it, what got you here won't get you there, is we took a lot of the middle management of those smaller companies and put them into higher management roles of a bigger company. And that's not necessarily a skill set that somebody just jumps into. Those should have been vetted a little bit better, if you will. So, man, I could go days talking about that merger.
So how many disparate companies was it?
There were 4.
4 disparate companies coming together in 4 different markets, or more than 4 markets?
So Chris and I's company had 2 markets when time of merger, and then I guess you can consider Matt Tringali's is 2 markets. He had some South Carolina stuff, if I remember right. Yeah.
Okay, so a handful of markets here. This is one of the things I'm really interested to talk with you about. We talked about this at lunch prior, centralization, the opportunities that exist. Centralization is the seed bed, it is the foundation of consolidation, roll up, merger, efficiency. If people understood there implicitly was no efficiency in merging, we would see less mergers. It's the buy-in, it's the ante, is this idea that you're going to unlock some kind of transformational efficiency. At the scale that you are at, of you said around 1,200 doors, what did you see in the gains associated with centralization while merging? What part of that promise played out and showed up, and what part of that promise did not materialize in the way that you had thought it would around efficiency of the combined entity?
Yeah, I think maintenance can be centralized to a certain degree when there is understanding that there are market nuances. And we experienced that pretty well. Accounting can also be centralized very well, I think, really simply. You can standardize. The challenge there is that one company may have a certain process that we pay our owners on, every Friday that there's a funds in the bank account or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a scalable tactic, if you will. So to then standardize and then centralize is kind of the method you have to go with. But accounting can definitely be done well. What can't be done is things like certain services that are market specific. So we mentioned at lunch today, but one of the challenges we had was like gutter cleaning service. That doesn't exist in New Mexico. Why? Because, it's desert and there's really not anything to clean out
Gutter
of.
cleaning and snow blowing were both probably misses in that market.
Big misses, right? So, like, you can't, if you go to a client and ask, we're implementing a new service and it's going to be gutter cleaning to a New Mexico client, they're going to say that you're stealing money from me because there's no such thing.
It's a scam.
It's a scam. So we found that like those types of things were very challenging. The other part was the regulatory side. In one state, you may be able to give a 3-day notice to pay or quit. But in, say, for Colorado, they've gotten really progressive with their landlord-tenant laws. And I think it's like a 15-day or something like that now. That is very difficult to standardize. So now you have to delineate a process specific to a state. And therefore, it's a totally different system to follow, which causes complexity. And complexity in business is not a good thing 99% of the time. I haven't found it to be a good thing at all yet. As simple as you can make it is the better outcome in that I found. And so those are just some examples. There's so many different things that I found that decentralization, even after we did acquisitions, was the best method to allow the operator who knows the marketplace to have the relationship with their staff and their staff to the client was far more valuable than we trying to centralize into, you're going to email me and you're going to get a ticket and we'll call you from some central operating place, whenever it's convenient for us to get back to you, or 24 hours or whatever. I found that the decentralization was far more valuable to the client than it was to us.
Okay, so let's get specific. It's more valuable to the client. But what are we aiming at? What's the goal? That value to the client, where does that come back to the PM? The centralization efficiency argument is the value that comes back as you get to cut labor, expand profit margins. But you're highlighting value for the client, which obviously should translate to value for the PM. Where does that value show up on the P&L or in the business model?
Well, I think that on the P&L, it shows up in the churn side of things. And, Johnny client has been dealing with Stacy property manager for 5 years. And now, we're trying to centralize and find economies of scale. And so now Stacy's job is, not there anymore because we have consolidated roles, if you will. That's when the churn happens. We lose that high level of knowledge at the frontline position that has been dealing with and knows that property intimately. And now they are no longer at the company. So you replace them with maybe a remote team member or somebody or, less skills or less knowledge. And just that, I it doesn't really matter how many notes we put in the property management software about what, that property is about or that tenant is about. The nuance of knowledge that occurs in somebody's mind when they're servicing a client is just naturally lost, and so you get churn, and that hurts the bottom line. I guess the biggest thing is that the reputation then starts to suffer because the customer satisfaction is gone. The customer experience. Like, I used to deal with Stacy, and now I don't deal with Stacy. I'm going to go find a small property management company I can have a relationship with, and that's what we saw.
And that has its own cascading effects around internal morale when you start seeing the shift and the churn and complaints coming from around that. What I hear you saying is that Stacy, in this example, she is the world's foremost expert at 123 Apple Tree Lane property. You're paying more for this level of autonomy, acumen, and expertise. And the trade-off that centralization offers is we could hire somebody else. We could replace Stacy, if we're being honest, for somebody at a lower level of skill, lower level of pay, and at face value, what's in between is profit margin, right? Money you're able to suck out. What you're highlighting is that there is a service quality line, there's a threshold, and when you go below it, the idea that you're going to save money or make up money on those margins is a fantasy because you end up losing the property. This is probably the thing that is not been highlighted well, is calibrating against that minimum viable line to maintain the client in place. Any theoretical gains that require you to dip below that level of quality, they're not real, because if the client leaves, so does any of the labor savings you could have achieved. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
Very fair. Yep.
What's interesting is hearing you articulate this about efficiency and centralization, you went further into centralization from this experiment. Yeah. What was the next leg of the journey? Where did that story, how long were you in that merger structure, and where did that eventually land? What was next?
Yeah, so it was about 2 years we were in the merger structure, and I felt like we were on the uphill climb of let's decentralize, and then we sold the company. We sold the company to Pure Property Management, and they were on a path to centralize on a large scale, a lot
Tens
bigger
of thousands
scale.
of units.
Yeah. I mean, we were so tiny. I had a very small sample size compared to what they were going through and are going through now.
We got it. So you go into this environment, having learned some lessons about centralization versus not. You join into Pure. Pure, again, similar to all of the roll-up M&A players, is focused on driving efficiencies and gains through centralization. We were talking at lunch about the setup that either enables or hinders centralization. I highlighted a couple of factors like geography, regulatory environment, type of asset class. What did you see as the baseline elements that will make it either easier or harder for you to centralize, that are just kind of like the background circumstances that either stack the deck for you or against you?
Yeah, I think a big one is, like you said, the asset class. The other one is, and I think it's overlooked a lot, is the format in which the property management company was servicing the client prior to. So what is their level of communication to the client? When are they expected to hear from the property management client when a notice to vacate happens, or going through an eviction? And when those, they only face those differences when the bad thing or whatever in the cycle of the tenant happen. So for instance, I've been through say I'm a client, I've been through an eviction with my previous company, and they communicated well through that process, and I heard from them from, A through Z stages. Now the new company has acquired me, and now I'm going through a new eviction, and I haven't heard from them. That's a totally different recipe than what I was expecting. So the expectation was, because a new company bought, I expect that my property's taken care of the same. And so what does the client assume? That they're not doing anything. The tenant's never going to leave. I'm never going to get my rent payment. And those are the things that I found were really challenging to overcome on how to standardize, because you don't know actually those instances until you face those instances on how to set the expectation with the client. When we bring on a new client organically, not through acquisition, we're able to sit down and have that conversation. This is what we do, and when this happens, this is how we handle that. But through an acquisition, it's a totally set of expectations that were set before you acquired, right? And so doing that at scale over dozens and dozens of businesses that have been acquired, you have 30, 40, 50 different ways of doing something, probably the same thing, right? So that became a very, very big challenge. Now, I guess there's probably some level of acceptance that you hope the client will have, but the reality is that, you have the Targets, the Walmarts now. We have a bigger company. I would rather deal with my Walt's hardware store than my Home Depot. You know what I mean? So I want that personal relationship. When I walk in, they know my name type of relationship. And so it seems like just when the wind shifts, it's time for me to move on and find a new property management company.
What I find interesting, what you're highlighting about all this nuance and the different setups and all of the really rich nuance that exists within property management, is that comes in spades with scale, particularly multi-market, multi-geography, multi-regulatory environment. One of the things that I've heard you articulate that really makes a ton of sense to me is that the efficiency is it's not all bad. For example, think about the regulatory environment. You're in 10 different markets and it's more or less regulation, just the typical nexus that you see from the coasts versus inland. A uniform approach there will arguably leave some level of money on the table. You brought up the example of evictions. If within your portfolio, the regulatory environment varies between a market where you can get a non-paying tenant out in 20 days versus the fastest you can get them out is 4 months, splitting the difference and just going in the middle, that doesn't create efficiency. No. It may create uniformity, but that's not the same as efficiency. Tell me more about any other examples and on that point.
Yeah, I think, it's naive to think that we'll just take the most strict regulatory body and we'll institute that as the standard of the company, because the stakeholder, which is the client in this case, is the one that gets the brunt of that decision. So if it takes double the time that they were normally used to because we've standardized a process, therefore they're losing. Well, what is it? It's like every 4 weeks a house is vacant. It's 8% of your annual cash flow. That's big. So you double that. Now you're at 16. It's hard to recover a cash flowing property if you want to be net positive for a client. You know what I mean? So that's just one process that we're talking about. Think of it on a pet instance, or a liability problem. I don't know. There's a million ways you could go with that, but I think simply just thinking that we're going to take the strictest regulatory body and make that the standard across the nation is it's a fallacy.
Or you're going to split it right down the middle. You're going to take whatever the variance is and you're going to peg it right to the middle in order to create uniformity. That can also leave a lot of opportunity on the table. This disparate variance market by market, it creates opportunity. Yep. And it's the ability to service and navigate through that creates this richness within property management. You meet so many different operators. And while a lot of the building blocks are the same, there's also so much nuance. What I see is that owners don't have an implicit interest in the business of property management per se. Like when the owner signs up with you, they don't necessarily care if you're running a profitable business. What they want are the things that relate to them: quick response times, knowing that you're hiring competent vendors, etc. There will always be a guy swinging a hammer in a truck. There will always be a realtor, a failed realtor, should I say, that is now a professional property manager. And what I find interesting about that is there will always be a need and a desire for people that will be maximally available, get to the job now, and they may not be running an efficient, profitable business, but they are creating value in the marketplace. How do you think about the value that a big property management business can create versus a small local mom and pop operator when it comes to customer facing value? What are the kind of the arguments in favor of either side when it comes to customer facing value?
Yeah, so I would say that a customer really cares about three things in the property management space as a landlord or owns an investor. They care about the best tenant, they want the best tenant in the shortest amount of time, and they want their property taken care of. Where I think the bigger companies can really differentiate themselves is the services that will secure the property. So, can I get a better rate on my insurance? Can I get better benefits for my tenant? Can I get better benefits for me as the client? But really, you got to overcome the two hard ones is can I get a good tenant, the best tenant in the shortest amount of time? And that's like if we're standardizing based off of regulatory bodies, it's really difficult to split the difference. It's always better to go to the strictest in each individual market versus trying to standardize at a economies of scale methodology. That is a challenge. So, for instance, like if we were lackadaisical on leasing because our main market is Southern California or something like that, we're used to leasing properties in 30 days, making up numbers. But then we have a market here in New Mexico, for instance, that we can lease properties in 7 days, but we're not attentive to that, and we default to the 30-day method of Southern California, for instance. That is not servicing that client. And probably the most important thing they care about is letting the property as quickly as possible to the next tenant.
You're highlighting a lot of nuance here. It's a complicated.
Do you have that gray hair? To prove this.
It's a complicated game. So you learned a lot of lessons in the property management game, and you've been exited for the last 3 years. As you've taken time to reflect on the best and worst of it, what did you personally, as a human being with one life to live, what did you get out of being an active operator? What was that? Was it 10-year, 12-year?
Yeah, 11-ish. Yeah.
What would you reflect on was like at a really high level, the best and the worst of what you've taken away, like at a human level?
The best thing I loved is leading a team. I loved the office environment, the people, the staff. I loved developing leaders. That was probably my favorite thing. Second favorite thing was property management is the gateway drug to building some serious wealth.
Yeah.
Like I love that too. That is super phenomenal. The things I didn't care for is that I always felt like it was hard to get a client from the mindset that you're a gopher. Go for this, go for that versus the expert. Like I want you to call me when you got a stump, like you're really stumped on how to handle a situation because you need advisement. That was a hard thing to get people to shift to. And I think there's a lot you can do, but there's that default, and especially in America, like we're a DIY country. So many, I want to just go fix that plumbing myself, you know what I mean? Instead of like, we'll hire an expert that's going to be licensed and insured so that if they tripped and fall, that they're, your tenant's not suing you to high heaven. To really look at you as the expert in the industry was a challenge. Didn't love that part.
It makes sense. Common refrain there.
Well, I mean, I think it's we're the middleman in a tough situation. We have, and it shouldn't be, but we have sometimes two opposing entities. We have a tenant and a client. Although if a client viewed the tenant as an asset, we would probably get over this opposing entity issue. But they don't. A lot of times it's more of a convenience. They're conveniently paying my mortgage. They're conveniently, paying down my loan. And that's unfortunate because you're stuck in the middle in the property management space.
Totally. That's a whole nother podcast on how to relate and identify with the tenant there. When you mentioned the bit about the wealth creation along the way, you have taken more time off here the last couple of years. You have some new endeavors that you're up to right now, but the optionality that you've been able to create for yourself as a result of this stint of a decade plus in the industry, how much of that financial freedom and optionality was created by creating an asset, growing it in enterprise value, and selling it, as opposed to investing in real estate and using the passive income associated with that as a cash flow vehicle?
Yeah, for us, it's hard to put like a direct correlation, but most of our direct wealth has been from the property management company while owning it and investing in properties within the portfolio, from the portfolio. And then there was ancillary business through that. Because people, and we had a reputation in the marketplace, knew that we not only managed properties, but we invested in properties. It came with the phone ringing, right? Like, hey, I'm ready to sell my house. Would you buy it? For instance, one of our best cash flowing properties is my dad's neighbor had a failed barbecue restaurant, and he had this big big building in town, and it was sitting vacant. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture said, we really want to occupy this space, but it's set up for a restaurant. We need to, redo that into a office space. And so Kristen negotiated that lease for 2 years before we even closed on that property. But that became a asset for us because people knew we were in the investment space. Like, we were looking to buy properties, and they knew we had a property management company. So that's one of them. When we sold the business, the money that we got from the business didn't go to buy more real estate. We took a little bit higher risk in some investments. So we bought shares in softwares and even some crypto mining investments. So, a little bit higher risk because we can take some higher risk because we had the assets and the cash flow of the investment properties.
So the investments that you made in the rental properties and the bump that you got from that, I'm hearing you saying, like, obviously you acquired property, but when you say the phone ringing off the hook, do you mean ringing off the hook with people wanting to sell you properties, or also people wanting you to manage their properties knowing that you were an active investor in the same market?
Mostly just wanting to sell their property as an investment. Yeah. And I'm not saying like ringing off the hook like 5 calls a day. I'm talking like 3 or 4 a month. But that's pretty awesome for a lead source on buying investment properties.
Did you find that there was a bump to marketing because of the credibility associated with the fact that you were an active investor?
Sure, I think so. I think there's a lot to be said about a property manager that understands what it is to be an investor, that owns rental properties. There's a different thing for somebody that manages properties but has never been a rental property owner. They have a different perspective. And not that it's wrong or right. It's just different. You understand that, like, when a plumber says that we'll replace the toilet for $500, that's highway robbery. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you'll push back. You know what I mean? Because there's cash flow on the line here.
What I find interesting is I know this to be true, having done coaching work with a lot of operators that came from the REI side and had to get over the hump of over-identifying with the investor to the degree that they weren't making any money.
Oh, yep.
They were so averse to any kind of fees. They were so averse to anything that would disrupt the cash flow, and seeing that kind of necessary shift to really land somewhere in the middle being like running a sustainable business that can actually provide a high quality of service, which does require profit.
Yeah, that's interesting. I could see that because they're in the frame of mind that it's always about the bottom line as an investment company or an investor. And if that is true, then it also has to be true for the property management company, right? Mm. And those things, although it seems like they don't coincide well, because if I'm profitable as a property management company owner, then therefore the client can't be profitable. But that's not true, right? Mm-hmm. We can find a lot more value in the services we provide and charge accordingly by doing things that are valuable to the client, like leasing their property to great tenants, leasing it as quickly as humanly possible, like being a dog about getting that thing leased, right? Not placing tenants that are going to damage the property, not utilizing vendors that are going to overcharge or not do quality workmanship. That's where that value is regained. And I see a lot of pure investors that don't do the property management side gravitate towards, I want a cheapest plumber. It doesn't matter if it's quality sometimes, you know what I mean? I'm just worried about the bottom line. I just want the job done. And I think that's where the two kind of marry together.
Tell me about the real estate portfolio that you built specifically through running the property management company over this 10-year stint.
I don't know the exact number, but it's about 30 doors, single family doors that we got from clients that are wanting to sell.
Mm-hmm.
That when they were wanting to sell, we would listen to the pains. Like, why do you want to sell it? A lot of times it was going through a divorce, or this was in a receivership and I'm the trustee and I don't know what to do with this property anymore. My mom lived there and now I live in New York. And we were the convenience to buy the property. For instance, when somebody's raising their hand and it's tenant occupied, well, the tenant doesn't get disrupted. You get to buy a property and the tenant doesn't even know it exchanged hands.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to prep the house for sale. We've been managing this property for X years. We know the condition of the property, so we're going to buy it as is. That's a convenience where somebody's not, if I put it on the market tomorrow, I got to replace the roof. I know I have to replace the roof. Well, I'll buy it in the condition it's in, and I'll face the roof problems myself.
And you're de-risking it. Your ability to negotiate is different because you understand the risk profile having managed it.
Exactly. Yeah. So it is always, it's like, what would this house bring on the open market? This is what you can get. We'd always present that. But in order to get that, the roof is bad. So that has to, that's going to come back on an inspection. You're going to pay 6% or whatever the number is in realtor fees. You're going to pay closing costs, title insurance, the whole shebang. And what we'll do is we'll match that price, but you get the convenience. Now we're not disrupting the tenant. We're not going through a bunch of inspections. You're not having to replace the roof. You're not having carrying costs during that time. And we're going to write you the same net out, but with all these conveniences.
How would you structure the average deal?
It's hard to say average, but if you want to do it at scale, you don't want to tie up a bunch of money. So it was always, would you be willing to carry the note? That was the terms. I would never say, will you owner finance this? That scares most people off because they start thinking banks. Although the outcome is the same, the language means something different. And so would you be willing to owner finance this house if we were able to solve the pain that you have today with the property? Say the pain is like, I don't have the money to replace the HVAC. That's okay. I will replace the HVAC if we can buy it at, your current mortgage amount and you owner finance that or take over the mortgage. How do we do that in practicality? Well, you're going to sign a warranty deed. That goes to me. So I now am the new owner. I'm going to sign a special warranty deed. So if I default, it goes back to you. So I've never defaulted, but if I defaulted, you have this security in a special warranty deed that it goes back to you. And then we're going to have online access together. You can always make sure that payment is paid. I'm going to set this up on recurring payments. I'm not even going to touch it. It's just going to get paid. I'm not going to think about it. And that's kind of the things that we would talk them through the security of selling a house on a owner finance.
Out of 10 properties in the portfolio that were sold, what percentage of those properties ended up going through this process? And what was your buying criteria? Access is one thing. Choosing to actually do it is a different.
Yeah, we had benchmarks. We didn't want single and double wide trailers in our portfolio personally, but we also didn't manage those. So it was easy to weed that out. We typically like to stick to B-class properties, and we like more than one bathroom. One bathroom was challenging, unless we knew that there was an opportunity to actually add value to that house. And then when it was vacant, then we would add a bathroom, and then we could explode the value because we've added a bathroom. And then as far as, the standards of the property management company or our benchmarking of what properties we would manage, vetted a lot of the ones that we would already own. So if it was in the management, we would typically want to own it. It already fit the criteria, if you will, because we were strict on what properties we would manage. And as far as percentage goes, like for every 10 that sold, we were probably 1 or 2 that had the opportunity to buy and actually would buy it.
So this whole kind of idea of like the insider trading of the fact that you're already in this position, it's incredibly advantaged. How long were you in the business before this opportunity became obvious to you?
6 months, probably.
6 months?
Yeah, 6 months.
So you already had did you already have a portfolio prior to starting the management company?
We owned just our personal home, so nothing. Yeah, I think, my taste of real estate was bought a house at 20, sold it at 22, and it made some money. It was an anomaly. It was in 2006 that occurred. And of course, 2008 happened 2 years later, but the bubble was, prime at '06. And so made money off that. That gave the seed like, oh, there's money in this real estate thing. And I remember setting this goal when I was 27 years old. Well, when I was 22, I set a goal for 27 that I said, I'm going to own 3 rental properties by the time I was 27. I didn't achieve it. But that was one of those moments in your life where like, I felt like a loser because I couldn't reach a goal that I had set for myself. And I was very intentional about that goal. I just didn't achieve it. But it actually like put a fire in my belly. Like, there's money in this real estate thing. I see the potential. Now, what do I need to do to actually do it? And I think property management, the company itself, I wouldn't say that it was the only avenue we would have got into the real estate investing space, but it certainly was an accelerator to it.
How do you think about, as a real estate investment professional now being separated from the management company, how do you think about asset class? What asset classes do you hold right now?
Just B&A.
So B&A, but single, multi, commercial.
Yeah. Okay. So we have 43 single and commercial. So single family and commercial. Those are duplex or smaller. Mm-hmm. And then the commercial that are in there, 4-plex, 5-plex in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a office space that's U.S. Department of Agriculture in Farmington. And then we have 2 office professional suites in Farmington as well. That's all the commercial. The rest are single family of duplex or smaller. So pretty much singles. And then we have a 357 bed apartment complex that was done off a GP syndication in Oklahoma.
Yeah. So was that unrelated to the management portfolio?
Totally unrelated. Yeah. I don't even consider that any cash flow because that was student housing purchased 6 months prior to COVID. So that one's really been a break-even property for 5 years now. Yeah.
I'm sure that was rough the day that, for the GPs, the day that the implications of that dawned.
Oh, the world's shutting down. Great.
Yeah, perfect.
So was the college.
So let's talk a little bit about contrasting cash flow. You've experienced operational cash flow. I was able to be part of the conversation and journey with you through Profit Coach talking about cash flow. There's been a whole industry-wide conversation around the importance of profit. And yet the type of profit coming out of a going concern, an operational entity, versus the type of cash flow coming out of the properties that you own, how would you differentiate, delineate, and how do you relate differently to these, same types of dollars coming out of these two circumstances?
Yeah, the way I look at it is how many properties can I own? Well, let's flip the answer. How many properties do I need to manage versus one that I need to own?
To create the equivalent cash outcome.
The equivalent cash flow outcome. Because that's not equating the other 4 ways to make money in real estate, but that's the primary cash flow that everybody thinks is the most sexy. But so for us, like our portfolio, it takes 33 houses to manage versus 1 property owned. That's the cash flow equivalent. So that's how I view it. The other part of that is maybe the more emotional side. Well, when I own the property, I don't have to go negotiate with myself to go replace the HVAC. I just go replace the HVAC, right? Because I'm the owner and I want to do what's right by the tenant. Instead, when you manage your property, then it becomes over the spending limit of the maintenance reserves, and I got to go to a client to get money to go to the vendor to actually make the service happen. That's the different part that I also like. Now, I would never advocate to replace all of them to not do property management, because I think property management, again, is just such a gateway drug to real estate investing, and they work great together. But it's nice to then either scale your cash flow, because now I've owned a property and the equivalent 1 to 33. I've increased my cash flow because now I own it. Versus should I, squash the management side, make it smaller, and make my investment side bigger? I don't know. I wouldn't say there's a great answer to that. It's more of what you want in your own lifestyle, and what you want your cash flow to be. But they work so hand in hand. I would never advocate you shouldn't be a property manager, because it's such a great way to invest in real estate.
How would you contrast the volatility of the cash flow that you experienced in running an operating business versus the volatility in the cash flow from the assets that you own?
Oh, I think volatility gets minimized when there's scale. So, for instance, if you own one rental property and it becomes vacant, that hurts. It's painful. How I would advise to remedy or lessen the blow is take all the rents for the first year and put it in a bank account, and then take the cash flow after that. Take a reserve fund, if you will.
Your
So
buffer.
a buffer. But the property management, that's what I love about property management. It's recurring revenue that's contractual. There's really not with some exceptions to some marketplaces, some seasonality to them. There's really not a lot of ebbs and flows. Obviously, leasing season's the best if you have a leasing fee, but the property management side seems to always be very stable. I think that's the attraction of why realtors get into the space, because they're starving every 30 days, right? They got a new job every 30 days they've got to provide for. But in the real estate investing space, I think it becomes naturally easier with the ebbs and flows as it scales. Because of the cash flow and the loan, like we keep about 45% LTV. So, we only leverage about 45% of our properties, or 45% of the value of our properties are leveraged. So what does that mean? So 10 of them goes vacant. It doesn't hurt still. I have enough cash flow to handle the rest. 20 goes vacant and I'd still be fine. You know what I mean? So I think that just comes with scale and seasoning or maturity of the portfolio.
When you say seasoning, do you mean like in the technical sense of like a hold time?
Yeah, hold time. Yep.
How does the cash flow from these properties compare to the cash flow that you had, like peak cash flow from the PM business when it was at its peak?
It's almost 1-to-1.
It's almost 1-to-1.
Yes.
And how much time are you spending managing these properties now?
I spend less than an hour a week because my property manager, Janelle, is in Jamaica and she does everything. So if I have to get involved, it's like a major item to service, or to deal with.
Hour a week, comparable size cash flow.
Yep.
How much time were you spending when you were running the management business on a given week?
So after the merger, it was full time, 60 hours a week or so. Before the merger, when it was just Chris and I's business in Arizona and New Mexico, we were spending 2 hours a week. We had developed our team, and they would actually make those comments like, "Why are you here? It runs better when you're gone." You know what I mean? And we appreciated that because we were traveling and spending a lot of time with our kids and whatnot, and really just focused on hitting milestones and benchmarks. And we would run our level 10s at that time, and that's it really.
What is a level 10 for those that don't know?
Oh, EOS level 10 meeting. I haven't done it in so long. I don't remember the specifics anymore, but
you're rusty with it.
Yeah, I'm rusty.
Shout out to EOS. Our company still operates off of that. So the intentionality that you had around wealth creation through real estate, it's a really market outcome for you. What I'm seeing is that you worked so hard to build this management company and you sold it. And for most folks, that's the whole thing. That's like sticking the landing, is pursuing this enterprise value and hoping someday in the future it'll be enough. What I'm hearing you say is that the proceeds from the sale of the management company it was a bonus. It was something on top. It was not your nut. Your nut was the assets that you had accrued along the way through the vehicle of the management company.
That's 100% true. What we realized early on, if we're going to be entrepreneurs, it doesn't come with a pension. And it doesn't come with a 401k unless I'm the guy contributing, like the company I'm working for is not putting into it. So in order to create autonomy in our lives, we had to have additional streams of income. Otherwise, if I'm the guy at the business and that business is the only provider for my family, and I get hit by a bus tomorrow, What does that do to my family? That's the mindset that we had early on. So how do I diversify my income streams so that if something happens, whether the rentals go away or
Lawsuit.
if the lawsuit happens, we've heard so many big lawsuits in this industry. Not even a liability with the management company, but they have to defend it, and hundreds of thousands of dollars go out the door to
Or
defend it.
theft, embezzlement.
Yeah, all of the things that can happen. How do we have autonomy in our lives that our lives are not going to be rocked by that situation? And that's why we, doubled down on real estate investing.
Building this fortress of cash, this fortress of balance sheet strength built on the back of assets is now, with several years of distance between running the management company, it's where you've landed as what you are putting your energy into going forward, is helping other people achieve generational wealth. And I think that's what I find interesting, is that term is totally legitimate. What you and I were talking about before the show was this. Early on in business, it's easy to focus on size for the sake of size. Who has the bigger bag?
More doors will save me.
Yes. Who can have the biggest bag of wealth? And what's really interesting about that proposition is that it is by definition exclusive, because it's driven by comparison. More as compared to what? It's just more than you. I just want to have more than you. And that's the human condition. That's human nature. And it's by definition exclusionary simply because of the math implicit in it. Whereas folks aiming at freedom are operating with a completely different set of priorities, and financial freedom can be tailored down to whatever your dreams and aspirations are. Now, if you need 10 yachts, then yeah, you need a big bag, but
a lot of freedom.
Most people don't need 10 yachts. This vision of freedom, the thing that you're excited about, and I see this passion with, this is doable. This is achievable. What I want to hear from you is, you've experienced it. Have you talked to other operators that have gone down this same path? Are you one of one, or do you have other peers that have gone down this same path?
There's actually several that I keep close in contact with that have, in their own way, figured out how to create generational wealth in real estate beyond the property management company. I see, the build to rent strategies that have happened. Shout out my man.
Yeah. We're on the same wavelength.
And then there's a fella in Phoenix, Arizona, similar path that Chris and I took. Like I buy properties from my rental portfolio, and it's been viable. And I think he had like 75 doors. It's phenomenal, But the point is that it is not a reinvention of the wheel, and it is completely doable. And we are at the forefront of the opportunity if you understand how to seize the opportunity. I think what we see so common, that the folks that have the least to lose aren't willing to take any risk to gain. And the folks that have the most to lose are always willing to take the risk to lose. Does that make sense? I mean, the risk factor, well, I think I look back in my childhood, and we were always told this lie. This lie is, go to college, get a degree, go get the best job you can, work your butt off, save 10%, and invest 10%. And then someday, when you're old enough, you'll get to retire. Well, by then, and then I'm old and I don't want to, you know what I mean? I won't be able to enjoy it. And they say, save 10%. That's like the worst advice you can give, because it's undeployed capital. Money in a savings account loses at least the inflationary rate every single year. That's not even, and it's going up. That doesn't even include the opportunity cost on that dollar. So savings is a terrible way to think about. But yeah, this is not a, what would you call it? A genius thing. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't take, smarter people aren't the rich ones. Those are the people that have only failed more often and figured out to reiterate and then moved faster.
What's been the impact on your family and your personal life in choosing to aim at freedom instead of aiming at the largest number of dollars possible?
Oh, that's a good question. I think just time with with family, travel. We go on pretty extravagant trips, get to like shut things off and just focus on the family and be present. Is probably the biggest thing. The other opportunity is like we get to send our kids to private school and not have to go to public school. And not that there's anything wrong with public school, but we wanted our kids to go to private school. That was extremely important to us. Yeah, I think just like allowing the kids, I think the biggest thing for me is allowing the kids to think that life doesn't have to have limits if you don't put the limits on yourself. So how can I'm probably brainwashing both of my kids. We had this kind of conversation. Like how do you think outside of a 9 to 5? Kids are put into the schooling format, and it's almost like an indoctrination format. You got to go to school from 8 to 3 because that's what you do, and you're going to learn how to deconstruct a sentence and conjugate a noun, and I don't even know if those are real things, but they do that in school, and so therefore, which they'll never use those skills in the real world. How do I indoctrinate them in my mindset? Like to be an entrepreneur, how do you create value for for somebody else that they're willing to pay for? That's how that's how the world turns, right? Is people willing to take risks to create a value for somebody else in exchange for money? And how do I get my kids to think? That's probably the most important thing on the freedom side is that I've gotten to think outside of a 9 to 5 job.
And another way to put that is you just have more time to think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
More time to think, to plan, to express your unique set of priorities in whatever way is fulfilling and rewarding to you.
Yeah. There's that great book by Keith Cunningham, The Road Less Stupid. And he says, go think. You'll thank yourself later. You'll thank me later. And it's so true. Like if we all just took a second to think, there's so much value in that. And that has given the opportunity more than I actually expected, because you think you just fill your time with, nuance and non-important things, but you actually get time to think and how do I create value is always been on the forefront.
I really believe in the significance of what we're talking about in this conversation, this pursuit of freedom. My journey looked like helping facilitate a conversation around growth. How, really sales marketing early on in my career. First, I was doing lead gen, then I get into the CRM game. CRM was a natural focus, and realizing somewhere along the way that you could grow a big business and not make any money. That was a little demoralizing, confusing. Like you could have a big business and not make any money. Who would want to do that? And then realizing more common than we thought, actually.
Isn't it Etsy that's never been in the black? I think they've been in the red since day one.
Which is insane. Yeah, insane. So realizing that profit is important, and then pressing past profit and realizing that freedom is what is important. The biggest bag of profits, that's not really the aim. That's not the goal. It's freedom. And that biggest bag of profits, that's a very competitive space, but freedom really is for everybody that wants it. Freedom is the democratized vehicle for changing people's lives, and it's doable. It's within striking distance. It's a function of intention and belief that it's possible. And being around other people that have done it obviously changes the calculus of that belief system. The pivot that you've made more recently is to focus on helping other property management entrepreneurs build generational wealth through a specific construct and program that more or less mirrors what you did yourself. What's the name of the program? Give me some more of the details. What's the focus and opportunity for folks that may have interest in this?
Yeah, so it's called the Generational Wealth Format for Property Management Company Owners. And it's really designed for those property management company owners that are making some money, making good money, but they don't know how to actually make that into an asset. How do we turn that good cash flow into a snowballing flywheel of money and assets so that I can leave it for my generation or leave a legacy behind. So, in order to do that, you have to have clear frameworks of where your finances are. So a rock solid financial structure. I believe that your business and your personal finances should be simpatico. Do they mix? No. We don't have our personal life.
You don't live out of the operating account.
You don't live out of the operating account. However, if you've got a healthy life, financial life, if you will, personally, that helps your financial life and the business, and they work together. So often we don't even know where our money's going, right? Most people we start making more money and we start living up to those means again. And then we start making more money and then we live up to those means again. And we never keep that spread, if you will, to reinvest in actual assets or cash flowing assets or for a legacy, if you will. So setting up a framework for that. A lot of that is understanding wealth mindsets. Like there are specific ways that rich people think differently than poor. The poor thinks the purpose of money is to pay my bills. That I'm in survival mode. I got to pay my bills.
A consumption orientation.
Consumption. The middle class, they think I got to pay my bills on time so I can build and maintain credit, so I can buy a car or a house that I can't afford to pay cash for to impress people that don't care about me and I don't care about them. That's the middle class. Does that not fit?
That's fair.
Fair. But the rich thinks about money as I've got to make money, make money. My babies need to make babies. And I never never withdraw my initial investment because I live off the interest in the outcome of the money.
Protect the principal.
Protect the principal. Because that principle, like for instance, if I was to buy an Apple stock 20 years ago, that's different than me buying one Apple stock today.
Mm-hmm.
That's never touching the baby, right? So that, the wealth framework or wealth mindset is so empirically important to figure out. And so I'll talk about the other phases, but the point is how do I even come up with this construct that will be meaningful to property managers? As I interviewed 53 property management companies, and I found that just like general society, most property managers are just like most Americans. Living paycheck. 68% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. No different than a business owner. Although 88% of business owners, or 88% of millionaires own a business. But that just doesn't, 1-to-1 ratio here. So you got to get out of that poor mindset, if you will. Like just spending as much as I make is not going to get you to a wealth generation. So the next phase is how do we then maximize the two levers? We have two levers in business, right? We can increase revenue and we can decrease expenses. And that delta is what we can use to reinvest in the business, invest in other assets, other income streams, and so forth. Part of the program is to make that spread wider for you. How do we find the opportunities in the business to do that? And then utilizing the systematic approach of buying rental properties from your clients. So when they call and say, I don't like, or to get them to call and think of you when they are ready to sell, I don't like owning this rental property. You know how to handle that situation and talk to them with creative finance in mind. So I'm not leveraging more cash out and pull in that investment into your own portfolio. Now, I love making money for other people. Property managers are great at making money for other people, but you also need to make money for yourself, and money that doesn't just come by the month and go by the month, right? We want money that prints money month over month. And then the last really important framework in the generational wealth framework is to focus on how do we set this up on a legacy for your family. So if you died tomorrow, all of the assets that you've been able to accumulate, including your business, doesn't go to the state probate and gets, decided by a judge. Mm-hmm. So the ways to think about that is living revocable trusts, setting up those assets into LLCs, having a clear will and a beneficiary when you pass away. And how does that actually get settled when you're no longer here to advocate for yourself? And that's kind of the 8-week format that is, what I love about this is like, it doesn't just focus on one single spectrum of the business, one little avenue of the business. It thinks about how do we have a goal in mind of generational wealth and wrap those into a program that takes somebody through a journey of a transformation.
So this is an opportunity to reset focus for folks. That's a big part of what I'm hearing. There's obviously specific technical language around the mechanics of how to get a deal done, how to facilitate it, how to structure, how to finance. But I think the biggest takeaway for me here is that this is just an area for an operator to recalibrate their zone of focus in the business. And for me, that works. What I've seen time and time again is that when we think about change and what drives a different outcome, we have the intention, which is simply the will to do something, and then we have all the mechanism, the practical mechanics of how to get it done. We tend to over-index on the mechanism, the specific how, the enticing complexity, which is the excuse and the reason why I'm not actually doing it, and underplay sheer raw grit and will. I know for myself, the people that I am around tend to create a massive amount of gravity for me. When you think about a change in any pursuit, think about like losing weight, for an example. When you go and work with a personal trainer, is them telling you that if you lift heavy objects, it will tear muscle fibers? Like, is that the key unlock that enabled things? Probably not. It's the presence of mind of having somebody else that is deeply sympathetic to your goals, that believes that you can actually change, and that has done it themselves and can show you the way. That's the opportunity that I'm seeing here, is for somebody that's been running the same business 2, 3, 4, 5 years to just shift what they're aiming at and shift their orientation. For somebody that's curious about like the specific cadence of conversations with you and what that looks like, if somebody enrolls, like what are they experiencing over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, so they get 8 weekly live sessions, then they're group sessions, and with a Q&A at the end to solve any questions initially, and then there's weekly coaching calls on top of that. And those can go in perpetuity. The point is like I know that it takes time to set up a framework and to really lay the foundation for these concepts and these, not concepts, but these actual actionable items. And so hop in and hop out anytime for as long as needed to achieve the goal that you're looking for, because I truly care to take somebody through that journey. And so when something arises, or for instance, they've got an opportunity to invest in something, to help coach them through that investment so they can actually make the investment into their portfolio. And then it's a community of other property management company owners who are going through this together. And what I've seen through these is just so magical to be able to bounce ideas off of, I'm going to put this question out to the group, and this is what I think will happen. Then the group has ideas on how to solve that problem beyond myself. And I think a mastermind type of culture is super valuable in these formats.
I think about that popular phrase, the obstacle is the way. And I think about the transformation between having a owner complaint about how much they hate this property go from something that's triggering and feels like a burden to like, I smell an opportunity here. That sounds really exciting, to flip the script on complaints and turn them into opportunities.
Yeah. Oh, it's totally. And I think where the industry is kind of landed is a lot are real estate agents. And so their natural gut instinct is I'll sell the house for you and I'll just solve that problem.
That one-time payday.
Yeah, one-time payday. And that sucks because you might make 10 grand today, but where is it tomorrow? You know what I mean? How can if I make an investment, that's not 10 grand, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars over years of assets, So thinking through like somebody's going through a problem, they've got a pain, and how can I solve that for them? The viable option, in my opinion, was always, how can I buy that from them?
How much more advantage do you think you are as a real estate investor? Because now it's kind of flipped. Before it was like you're a PM dabbling with REI. Now you're primarily REI, no longer actively in the PM business. How much more advantaged do you think you are as a REI operator, I should say, given the experience and the acumen that you have in being able to effectively internalize the management of your own portfolio, as opposed to the version of yourself that's outsourcing the whole thing?
I don't know. I would say the advantage is that I know the intricacies of property management, and that was huge as a operator. And the other part is that when I wasn't a property manager, I understood the intricacies of owning properties. And so I don't know that there's a massive advantage, if you will, but there's definitely a better perspective, I think, on both both routes. I think am I answering your question correct?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think it's an interesting answer. If you had to choose between, I guess maybe another way to phrase it would be, what would be the difference for you and the yield on your properties managing them in this current paradigm versus if you went to go find a retail third-party property manager?
Okay, so that's a way better way to think about that. So, okay, it's massively different. And I'll tell you why, because all of the fees that I had in my management company are the fees that I have in my investment properties. Therefore, my tenants will have the same structure as my management company.
The fees just flow to a different place.
Yeah, exactly. And they go straight to me, right? That's why the cash flow is so high. And I'm operating it as a business, not as a single asset class. So that is like my rental portfolio is operated like a management company because the value that I learned in the management company transformed into the portfolio. So the leasing fee, well, yeah, I charge that to a tenant. Of course I do, because I did it in the management company. Of course I charge them a pet fee and a monthly recurring pet fee.
And provide the commensurate benefits.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. We provide, a resident benefits package, for instance. But the average property or the average investor doesn't have those types of fee structures. They think, well, it's a rent collection and that's it. You know what I mean? And that's where their margins are squashed.
And this isn't even speaking to operational efficiency.
Right. No.
Because there is no permissions back and forth. There is no calling about the reserve. There is no bickering about a home warranty.
Yeah, that's right. And I pay a highly skilled Jamaican to take care of my properties. That's another efficiency I think most investors don't realize, that their management could be done, at a scale. And, there's a certain scale for an operator to hire a professional property manager stateside versus, there's some number that I should internalize that.
There's a step up.
Yeah, there's a step up somewhere. And wherever that is, I don't think many of them would realize to do that on a remote team basis.
If somebody is listening to this and actually wants to go to, do the full Monty and go down this, follow you along this journey, where would they go find more information?
Yeah, they could go to my website. So it's ShawnAustinJohnson.com. I had to make Austin in there because there's a beautiful gymnast named Shawn Johnson, spelt the same way.
ShawnAustinJohnson.com. And this is something that I fundamentally believe in, specifically the idea that freedom is accessible to the masses. It's a matter of intention and orientation. You've actually offered something specific to the listeners of the Profitable Property Management Podcast, and that is $1,000 off on the course. Where could somebody go to get details on that?
So go to the website, ShawnAustinJohnson.com, and then PPM.
/PPM.
Yep.
Let's close here. I've asked this closing question to a number of folks on the podcast, and I want to ask you, I know that entrepreneurship is something that's really deeply meaningful to you. Shawn, what's your take? Are entrepreneurs born or bred?
I lean towards the bred side because I think just about anything can be learned. And I think once a fire in someone's belly, they're willing to go to the end of the earth to figure it out. Definitely bred.
Squarely and firmly rooted in that camp, man. I am not so cleanly decided.
No.
I mean, it's a rich conversation. I think that entrepreneurial thinking can be learned. I have no doubt of that. And that gives me great encouragement and joy to know that it's not an exclusive club. The willingness to suffer, the willingness to chew glass for an extended period of time.
Delayed gratification.
There's more of a born part on that side for me. The more suffering you go through, and I don't wish suffering on anybody, but that temperament and that willingness to go through that's hard to explain in a book, nor is it moral or necessarily worthwhile. It's just some people have that bias and inclination, and I mean, to be honest, kind of get off on it. And you and I are one of them. I'm grateful, and also grateful for every mentor and every lesson that I learned along the way. I want to thank you for the mentorship that you're providing the industry, sharing your story and giving back instead of like leaving and being off an island somewhere.
It's tempting.
I appreciate that you have this passion and that you're here to share like and pass it on, pass it forward.
Yeah, wealth is my favorite thing to talk about. I enjoy it. I love, I've been mentoring a lot of individuals through this process, not just in the property management space. I've got another meeting tomorrow morning for coffee to just mentor a fellow that's flipping houses. But I love this subject because, like you said, money really only means one thing, and it's freedom. And when we could gain it, your lives change. And it's so fun to see somebody transform through that.
And there's also some real beauty in unhooking from the comparison game, where the size of the bag is fundamentally defined by the size of other people's bags, like just unhooking and getting off of that treadmill. There's some real freedom, mental freedom, disconnected from financial freedom in that.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I had a guy on my podcast mention the thing that robs me the most of my joy is the comparison of others. And I think that is so true. If we stop that, we could probably gain a lot of joy in our lives.
Yeah, run your own race. Everybody will spend the time differently, but there's real universal agreement that having the time and having the freedom, that is the enabler of whatever it is you want to do that brings you fulfillment and satisfaction.
Tomorrow's not promised.
Let's leave it there. I appreciate you coming on. Until next time.
Thanks, Jordan.
That's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. You can check out other episodes along the way. If you're watching this on YouTube, appreciate a subscribe. Any comments, I'm always here to engage. If you're listening on an audio platform, we'd really appreciate a review. It's a great way to help other people find out about the show.